Hello, I'm Harold Munro, editor-in-chief at the Vancouver Sun and Province, joined by our city columnist, Dan Fumano. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Harold.
So you took it upon yourself to try to explain the new flipping tax, the new provincial flipping tax to everyone. And I think you learned a few things in looking at it. But first, why don't you just give us the Coles notes on what it is and how it works?
Yeah, so this was something that the province had announced they were going to be introducing this flipping tab. They announced it with the 2024 budget, which was released back in February. And David Eby, back when he was a couple of years ago, when he was running for the NDP leadership, BC NDP leadership, he had raised this idea. So it's kind of he had floated the idea. Obviously, he's premier now, and in sort of the final budget before the next provincial election, they've unveiled this flipping tax. And it essentially what it'll do is it'll sort of try to target the profits that home flippers would earn from real estate that they've only held for a short amount of time. So the tax would apply to any residential property or any property zoned for residential use that is owned for less than 2 years. So for the whole first year after you buy a property, if you sell it during that year, you would get hit with a 20% tax on the profit. And then the rate goes down steadily over the course of the second year, and then at the end of the second year, the tax does not apply.
Okay, and then there are some exceptions to that.
Yeah, there's a pretty long list of exemptions. So for it won't apply to nonprofit housing, nonprofit organizations or levels of government. So, if the city of Vancouver or the province of BC is buying and selling real estate, they're not going to have to pay this tax. It doesn't apply on, First Nations reserves and, treaty First Nations communities. And then there's also like a long list of sort of life circumstance events that people, if they can sort of prove that the sale of the property was reasonably connected to life circumstances, then they won't get hit with the tax. So it's things like divorce, involuntary job loss if you get fired from your job or you get laid off or whatever, and you have to move, or if you're moving for work or school, if you're moving to a new community, and you can prove that, then you're not going to get hit with the tax. Bankruptcy.
How does that work bureaucratically? How do you prove it? Who do you prove it to? What does that
I don't
even
know
look
the
like?
answer. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I
There's
mean,
like a whole another room full of people who are going to go through these things and try to figure out whether you qualify or not.
I guess so. I mean, it's like a lot of people have had calls from the Canada Revenue Agency or something saying, "Hey, can you please prove that this expense was related to work?" And then you have to approve it. You have to prove it. I don't
Well, they're
know
making
how
work for
onerous
themselves,
it will
for
be,
sure.
right?
Okay. So, and what does it
Because of
mean?
course
Like
we've
you
definitely
can,
heard from some people who have been hit, some property owners who've been hit with BC's speculation and vacancy tax, who did not feel like they should be getting hit with this tax. They're talking about homes that were not vacant, and then they have to go through what has been, we're hearing, a very onerous and difficult process of trying that the home is rented out, and they say it's been rented out a full time for many years. I mean, we spoke with one guy who got hit with the speculation and vacancy tax on the home where he himself lived and had raised his family and had lived for decades. And he was getting hit with the vacancy tax and having a horrible time trying to prove to these provincial government staff people that his home was not vacant, where he in fact had lived for decades. So yeah, I mean, so hopefully a year or two from now, we're not going to be hearing about a bunch of people who have had a death in the family or divorce or through some life, often a challenging life circumstance, and then they find out that they're also having to try to prove to the province that their family member actually died and the province isn't believing them or something. Hopefully, we're not going to be hearing about that, but if it starts happening, then hopefully we can tell the story.
yeah. Or I mean, I guess this circumstances. Say I buy a condo in Vancouver somewhere, and I work in North Vancouver, and then I discover that the commute, because we know what traffic is like over those bridges, is terrible, and it takes me too long to get there. So I decide I'm going to move closer to work to North Vancouver. Does that qualify as moving to be closer to work? Because now maybe you can walk to work and save all that money on transit. But I don't know if that would qualify or be good enough for the government to say, no, you can't move, you can't sell your home.
Well, you can sell your home, and it's not like
Not within
not
2
like this is
years. You can't do it
sure
within
you
2
can.
years.
You can sell your home, and it's not like this is a penalty like the speculation and vacancy tax that's going to be a hit. It's just a tax on the profit from the sale.
Yeah.
So
So it's a
you can still sell your home, and if, let's say, if you sell it at a loss or you sell it for the same price you bought it for, then you're not going to be worried about this tax anyways. But if you do earn a profit, you'll just make less of a profit than you otherwise would have.
right. It may end
Unless
up being a loss once you pay the fees, the transfer tax fees and the realtor fees, et cetera, et cetera. I could see that
So
eating up
that's a
any
good
potential profit.
question. I don't know if this tax is calculated on your profit after all of those fees, because those fees are massive, property transfer tax and stuff. If it's calculated on the profit after the fees, that would obviously be a very different situation.
Right.
And I actually don't know the answer. I don't know.
Okay.
Offhand.
How many
Question.
people, how many people are doing this?
The province has said that they estimate this tax will hit about 4,000 properties per year. 4,000. So that's, I mean, it's a very small in terms of percentage of the overall property transactions that take place in any given year in BC. But the province estimates it could generate. They had it estimated about $11 million in the first year, increasing significantly the following year to 43 million. So I'm not sure exactly why they expect it's going to increase so much. Now, all of the revenue generated from this will go into housing programs. Obviously, the province spends a lot on various housing programs. So all of the money generated from this will be earmarked for that specific purpose. Yeah, so the province is saying it's about 4,000 homes next year. But like we talked to people in the real estate market and people who will closely watch this stuff, and including the BC Real Estate Association and things like that, they're saying that there's not a lot of flipping activity right now, but it tends to kind of go in cycles. Every few years, depending on what the market conditions are like, there could be a surge in flipping activity. So they're bringing this in now, even though right now it's not seemingly a huge issue, but the next time there is a spike in flipping activity, this potentially could either discourage sort of the upward pressure that speculative activity can put on pricing, or if it is happening, at least then it generates money that can go towards the province's housing programs. So that's kind of that's the idea.
Yeah. 43 million more potentially for housing. So
yeah.
I would be curious to know how they come up with a 4,000 estimate, even because it's not like they ask people now. They're going to going forward. They're going to be asking people, why are you moving? If you're doing it within 2 years, but they weren't doing that before. So I have no idea how they would know whether it was a flip or it was a family circumstance situation.
Yeah, I don't know. There might be some research out there around that. Maybe it's like through Stats Canada or the census to get a sense of like when and why people move. Like when people relocate, how are they moving to a different province, a different municipality? What are the reasons for doing so? There might be some kind of research that's out there. I don't know.
Right. Okay. Now, what happens? I mean, there's been certainly over the last many years on networks like HGTV and others, these, people renovating homes and then flipping them or keeping them, or like any variation on that sort of theme. Is there any sort of an exemption if you do a certain amount of work to update a home and before you sell it?
Yeah. So there are kind of carve outs for, like, there's exemptions if you're adding housing. So if you're adding a secondary unit or a secondary suite as part of the renovations, and there's also sort of exemptions for substantial renovations, like if there's a lot of work being done to upgrade a property, and I'm not sure the precise detail, like how much work it has to be.
Sure.
But they've explicitly said that the target is meant to the tax is meant to target flippers and not to discourage the housing supply. So if you buy a rundown home that's not habitable, you fix it up and make it into a nice home, maybe with an additional suite or whatever, and then sell it. That's not the kind of activity the tax is meant to target. Now, of course, a year from now, 2 years from now, if we do start hearing from home builders that they feel they're being hit with the tax unfairly, then obviously I guess
Hmm.
we'll see if that does happen.
I see. And then do we know why it's set at 2 years? I'm always curious when they set these things. Why is it 2 years and not 1 year or 3 years or 5 years or?
Um, I don't, they didn't say in the government's press
Hmm.
release. Um, but basically, so I asked the housing ministry, and their kind of stated reason was they said that they felt like a 2 year holding period was chosen because 1 year is too short to capture all the flipping behavior. And so that's why they did this phased approach where if in the first year you get hit with a 20% uh, tax, but if you sell a project, or if you sell a property close to 2 years, your rate's not going to be that high, right?
I see.
It's
Okay.
really it's high in the first year and then it starts going down immediately. So it's like that's why the government's come up with this phased um
Hmm.
approach is what they're saying.
And it
So
is retroactive. I think you reported, right? It
yeah,
is
so that was
retroactive.
one thing that
Yeah.
that was one thing
Yeah.
that was interesting to me, and I feel like it could be a surprise to some people, is that if you purchased a property as long ago as 2023, you could be hit with this tax if you sell it this year, depending on obviously the precise day and month. But people could be hit with this tax, even for properties that they bought long before the tax was announced.
Hmm.
So,
Okay. You haven't heard from anybody in that position because there are people who effectively have done this as a business.
oh yeah, yeah, for sure. There's lots. And
Yeah.
so I haven't heard from anybody in that situation though. But I would imagine that people are going to be talking to their real estate agents, and realtors might encourage people to, like anybody does with the selling or buying of any property, they try to sort of sell it at the most advantageous time, right? And so in some cases it could mean delaying the sale. That was actually one of the reasons why the BC Real Estate Association had criticized this tax. They said it could kind of have unintended consequences because it will, in some cases, encourage people to delay selling a property, thereby reducing the inventory of properties for sale. So that's one reason the Real Estate
Hmm.
Association criticized the tax. But
Well, I guess that presumes nobody's living in it, though, because if
yeah,
someone's living in it, then it's already occupied, whether they sell it or not.
yeah,
Um, but and if there's nobody living in it, they get hit with the empty homes tax, don't they?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Potentially.
Yeah,
There's no escape, it seems now, if you want to own a
yeah,
property.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Okay, Dan. Well, thanks for your
Great,
time today. Have a great week.
great. Thanks, Harold. Thank you.